Aisha. Aisha is a translator and an analyst, and one of the people who has written about all the intricacies of the way the British law has dealt with people around issues of the war on terror. We are very honoured that she agreed to speak to us tonight.
Thank you very much to CagePrisoners for inviting me. I'm going to keep this very brief. I am an activist, and the main thing that I believe that people should be doing is taking some kind of action. It's fantastic to come to meetings, to sit down and listen, to play a passive role, but the question is, the issues that Victoria deals with in her book, some of them go back to the last millennium. We're not talking about since 2001, we're talking about, in some cases, 1996 and 1997, so this isn't a narrative that started on the 11th of September 2001. It goes back even further than that. So if we're talking about problems that go on for 2 years, 3 years, no, we're talking about some people's whole lifetime. Some of the children who are involved in this has been the story of their whole life. We tend to have this idea that charity begins at home, and unfortunately we tend to buy into this idea, we live in a capitalist world, that charity is something that comes out of your pocket and falls into a box. Okay? We also talk about time being money. So what I would actually say to everybody is you have this amazing commodity called time, you have the ability to use your time to do useful things and help people. One of the things that we have in our modern world is most people, I'm sure there's people here who are just checking on their phones, tweeting, WhatsApping, whatever, as I speak, and people use social media, and something could happen right now. For example, I believe it was on the BBC last week about a man who was beaten to death by the police, and all of a sudden we here in the UK can know about that in an instant. You know, maybe people down the road don't know about that. Similarly, there could be somebody just down this road. There are incidents that have happened today in this country that people will not be aware of that have happened. There will be people who will have been arrested, families who will have been threatened or somehow harassed by the police, in some other kind of form or way. And you know, there's people suffering right now and people don't know about it. And we're not talking about something that's happening, you know, for example, prisoners in Gaza, people know a lot about that. There's a lot of social networking activity that goes on about them. Prisoners in different places. There's a lot of information about Guantanamo Bay as well, which is the main thing I campaign about. But what about people right here, the families in this country who are affected, the individuals? Very often people don't know what's going on. And one of the things I would say is, you know, if you're not able to do anything else, when you hear about these stories, make sure other people find out about them too. I'm not talking about the ones that appear in the Daily Mail. I'm talking about the ones that might come out through more reliable and more unbiased sources than that. So yes, if you have the time, use it wisely. And why is it that it is important that you do take action? One of the reasons why people are forgotten, one of the biggest problems in this whole issue, and one of the words I've heard so many times from men, women, and even young children who are involved in this issue, and I've been dealing with this for the past 8 or 9 years, is the actual isolation that people suffer. It's the feeling of being on their own, of not having anybody care and know about what's happening to them. This happens in lots of different ways. Firstly, no one's going to tell you that the police came and kicked down their door earlier in the week, or earlier in the day, or earlier in the year. If you work with somebody who might be affected by the issue, they're hardly going to tell you that, oh yes, my husband's not around, my father's not around, my brother's not around. They're not going to tell you where they happen to be, if they happen to be in prison or something like that. So it's not something people are going to share with you. You could go to school with a child whose parent is in Guantanamo Bay, and they're not necessarily going to explain that to the other kids in the class. It's not their problem, but also imagine how those children would then deal with that. Yeah? Imagine how you would deal with it with somebody who's living down the street in the first place, and what it would be like if you were then actually affected by it. And the other way that these things tend to get enforced is, for example, in the case of people with under control orders and people who are under facing the threat of national security deportation, is that we only know of them by the letters of the alphabet. So, you know, oh, today we're going to talk about AA or ABCD. We don't actually have a name, we don't have faces, we don't have real people who we can actually peg these issues onto. So one of the things that you can do is help to combat this isolation. You know, what's already been mentioned is the mental suffering that people actually have to deal with. During the London Guantanamo campaign, we've actually, because we're mostly a North London-based campaign, we've actually met a lot of Irish people, because there's a lot of Irish people in North London, and a lot of them make the immediate links between what's happening to people in Guantanamo Bay and what happened to the community from Northern Ireland, or still happening in some cases, over the decades. And one of the things that comes through, particularly from women, is that, you know, oh yes, this happened to my family, this is how my mother dealt with it. And you know what, 35 years up the line, she's still suffering. So, you know, my brother was released in 1972, but this is how my mother still feels about it now, into her 80s, into her 90s. So it's not something that goes away. It's not something that is easy for an individual to have to deal with, especially when there is this kind of suspicion. And the other thing is, if you don't do something, if you're not taking some kind of positive action, in this case, you're actually perpetuating the problem. You're feeding into the narrative that the government wants to give you, that there are people you should be suspicious of, there are people who are bad, the bad men of Guantanamo Bay and the bad people in this country, and you should then stay away from them. So you're actually perpetuating the problem. And the first way of dealing with that is actually finding out what's going on, which is one of the things that CagePrisoners does incredibly well. The other thing about taking action, another misconception people tend to have, is that it's about the size of things. So, you know, if there's only this many people, well, that's not a lot of people. So we must have 1 million people or 2 million people. People think if you go to a demonstration, there's only 10 or 15 people. That's not a lot. There should be thousands of people. You know, the whole 10 years of the Iraq War now. So where are the 2 million people protesting on the streets of London again? That's not what it's about. It's about showing solidarity. It's the small acts of solidarity that actually make the biggest difference. That's what people need to see, and that's what people need to know. And there's lots of things you can do. You can work with CagePrisoners, you can work with Hugs, which Khatiba was talking about. I brought along a petition on behalf of an organisation called the Save Shakarama campaign. Shakarama, last British resident, recognised by the British government. Our campaign actually works for another man, but Shakarama is the last one the government has actually asked to come back. He's been in Guantanamo Bay for the last 11 years, and it's kind of like a game of ping pong between the American government and the British government. What, you ask one, why is he there? They'll say, ask the other. You ask the other, and you get the same answer. And that's what it's been like for the last 11 years. We don't know. Imagine what it's like for his youngest son, who's never actually met his own father. In 2009, we held a meeting about Shakarama, and his son was there. Everybody could have met his son. Shakarama's never done that. It's his own child. So there is a petition outside. There is a petition at the moment going to the British government. It's one of those nice little Write to David Cameron petitions that you need 100,000 signatures on. In order to trigger a debate in Parliament. Most of these petitions tend to be very popular if they're like anti, you know, or I should say pro-racism, let's keep all the Romanians out of the country, or something really pointless like that, or, you know, everyone should be able to watch football for free or something, you know, take it off Sky and put it on ITV or something like that. Those are, you know, the trending petitions. Let's try and get this petition to trend. It needs about another 70,000 signatures in the next 5 to 6 weeks. So I've left some forms outside. Please could everybody make sure that their name goes onto that form, and so that we can add it into the names on the list for that petition. Another thing, if you've never taken part in an action before, there's one coming up, there's plenty coming up actually, but on the 23rd of this month, the Save Shakarama campaign is also going to be holding a day of action in South London. So if you're from South London, you really don't have any excuse because it's probably local to you. At 12 o'clock, starting outside Tooting Mosque, I'm not from South London, so I don't know where that is. They will be holding a day-long work of action to get more signatures on this petition and raise awareness of Shakarama's case. He is from South London, he has a British family living in South London, and so that's part of the reason that they want to raise more awareness. If you've never taken part in an action before, why not? So, you know, in a couple of weeks' time, give it a go. It's not really as scary as all that. I have actually worked with the families of people who are prisoners who have been convicted, not on criminal cases and things like that. So I can actually say that, you know, even then, for women whose husbands and sons and brothers and whoever else, and men in their families might be in prison for theft or fraud or something like that, it's still a difficult situation. There's still mental anguish, there's still other issues that they have to deal with. I don't like the word suffering, I don't like victimization, I believe in empowerment instead. And one of the reasons why women and children suffer, I would say, have a different level of pressures is simply because they are left behind. So if the police come and kick someone's house door down, take the man away, he's got pressures to deal with when he's in jail. They have got other things to deal with outside. They've got to deal with the neighbours. They've got to get that door fixed. They've got to, have kids tell their friends and their teachers and everyone else at school. And what about the family? I mean, in so many cases, people have actually been isolated by their own families. Forget everyone else wanting to speak to them. Their own brothers and sisters don't want to speak to them. So there is that issue as well. And as I said, there's a mental health problems that come up with it too. One of the worst things that I have found from the people who I have worked with is the arbitrary nature of the detention. But A, you don't know why you're being detained, and B, you don't know how long. How long is really, that's the hard part, because real criminals know how long they've been sentenced for. They know when they're likely to be paroled or released. But people when you're a suspect for 15 years, you have no idea, okay? Final point I would like to make, we have been looking at women who are affected by these issues who tend to be Muslim women. It's not actually a given fact that Muslim people have to be related to Muslims. So it's quite possible that the women who are suffering and the children who are suffering are not Muslims, because, Muslim men can have non-Muslim wives and they can have non-Muslim mothers and they can have non-Muslim sisters. And when we started our campaign for Guantanamo Bay, we were actually told by one of the non-Muslim sisters of one of the men that she wished there was a similar kind of support network for her when her brother was in Guantanamo Bay. So let's not try and think of this in very narrow terms. Let's not try and think of this as being something that affects a very small number of people. This is actually a big problem. It's everybody's problem, and that's why it's something we should all be doing something about. First thing you can do is sign that petition outside. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to speak to us today. I just wanted to ask a quick couple of questions. For us, this is all about what happens next. Obviously, we had a fantastic turnout tonight, but it's about what happens next and what we can learn from this event. So for you, what's the most important thing to happen after this? What do you think the women who attended could do?
Well, I think everyone who's attended, men and women, should take action. It's the whole point of coming along to a meeting, the whole point of coming to an action is actually not to be passive and just sit there and listen to other people talk and to be inspired and think, oh, that was great, what she's doing is great. It's actually a question of people actually taking action themselves, getting up, going out and doing things. The first thing is coming to a meeting, you get that information, but what you do with the information that you have, how you act on it, that's the next step. So everybody needs to do something. With our own campaign, the London Guantanamo campaign, we find that there are people who are quite happy to stand out in the rain for hours and hours, or in the pouring cold and the snow, and they're happy with that. Other people don't like demonstrating. Some people like to demonstrate, don't like going to meetings. People like to go to meetings, don't like to demonstrate. So there's always something you can do. There's always somewhere you can raise awareness, but you can only raise awareness if you know what the issues are yourself. And at CagePrisoners, that's something you're very good at raising awareness about.
Right, thank you. And just quickly, what is it that inspired you to get involved in this? What is it that inspired you to want to come and speak about the shadow lives?
The main reason I wanted to come and speak, I'm not a very good speaker, but I wanted to make people aware that they can do something. We like to think that, I'm just an individual, I can't make a difference, but someone who's been organising demonstrations for at least the last 7 or 8 years, and someone who's been involved in activism, I can honestly say sometimes even when there's just 2 or 3 people at a demonstration, when there's just one person who's there when something bad happens to somebody else, when there's at least one person who can get the information out there and spread it to somebody else, that's what makes all the difference. It's not about the size, it's not about the impact that you make, because you don't know what that impact is going to be further up the line, and you don't know who that impact is going to be for. For example, we've been holding these demonstrations outside the US Embassy for the last, since 2007, so it's about 6 years now. We've been holding them regularly, and one of the things that, apparently we've been told by people in the United States that the United States government is very much aware that we are holding these regular actions outside the embassy in London. But the other reason that we do it is that even when there's been a case, there's just been 2 or 3 people outside the embassy, is that we want to show our solidarity with the men in Guantanamo Bay. We are aware that they're told about it sometimes, but the important thing is that there is that solidarity, that there is something, because something is always going to be better than nothing. And don't wait for other people to do it. Be the person to take the first initiative. Start off something great.
Yeah, brilliant. That's what we needed. Thank you so much. Thank you.